Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairy Tellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now,
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Yay! We did it!
It's been a little bit, and we are so happy to have you here with us.
It is so exciting to be back. And what better way to come back than an anniversary to be celebrating how much we've been podcasting?
Yay!
Yay! The irony is not lost on us. But yes, it is great to be back podcasting, getting excited for creating some more excellent Fairy Tellers content. I just want to give a quick thank you to our listeners who, when there was a sound glitch in the last episode, I want to thank the listeners that alerted us immediately.
Yeah.
It felt really good in my heart because, when we don't podcast for a really long time, I think to myself, I bet that all of our listeners have given up on us because we've just disappeared. So weirdly, it felt really good that so many people reached out within hours of us posting to let us know that something was wrong with the sound. It was funny because the first person who messaged me was a person that had never messaged me before, which is fine. It's just, it goes to kind of a separate waiting area because it all the algorithms want to make sure that I'm not getting death threats
or just bots.
Unsolicited nudes or anything. Yeah. Or that bots are reaching out to me. So at first, when I read it, when I read just the first, the username and then the first two words of the thing, I thought, oh, this is probably a bot asking me to promote, I don't know, butt tweezers on on my platform. And so I was like, okay, I'll look at that later.
Because I would be interested.
Yes, because I would be interested, but not right now because it's the middle of the night. And then several other people messaged me, and then it was some people who've messaged me before, and so it went to the kind of a priority or whatever. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And they're like, there's it was so sweet because every single person was like, I don't know if it's just me, but there seems to be a sound issue. And then I went and I was like, oh, is the sound issue that there is no sound?
It was just a really, avant-garde, cutting edge, experimental form of podcasting, kind of similar to, John Cage, where he did that whole what is it, 433 or whatever, where it's the person goes and they sit at the piano and they don't play anything. And the not playing anything, that's the musical composition. That's what we were doing. The podcast was in your head and in your heart at the moment that you were listening to it.
Whatever tale you were telling to yourself
about why there was no sound
is actually one of the most important narratives of all.
Yeah. So that was a fun little thing. And hopefully, this upload goes much smoother because we don't want to have forgotten how to do any of this.
I know. It's been months. We'll see if we've forgotten everything we ever knew about podcasting.
And I do want to fill some people in who may not have known, because we did talk about it on previous episodes or whatever, but it's again, that was a long time ago, and not everyone listens to every episode. I understand that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I feel like I barely listen to the episodes while we're recording them, to be honest, sometimes. But one of the main reasons why we haven't been doing stuff is because Katrina has been in the middle of moving. It feels weird for me to be the one let me tell you about Katrina's news about moving across the country and that being very busy for her. But
yeah, here's the thing. Katrina moved and she doesn't want to talk about it. No, it's just, yes, I was excited. It was so funny because I was excited for this summer because I was going to finish my classes, graduate, and then have kind of more time for podcasting while I figured out what my next steps were. But instead my next steps were, just kidding.
Let me put your computer and microphone and all of your books that you use to do your research in boxes that you will not have access to for weeks and months.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I've now found myself, I'm out of the desert and I'm into the woods.
Very appropriate for a fairy tale adjacent individual. Just for the title alone.
Yes, I'm into the woods. And I'm settling in, and I, thank goodness, found my microphone. That was the last missing piece. What's crazy is it's like the microphone's connected to like an arm, like extension thing. And so I would have thought, I was looking in very specific sized boxes because I was like, it can't be in some of like the smaller boxes that are filled with books. And so that at least gave me a clue as to what we were doing. But I was so excited because, yeah, my husband was the one who opened up the box and was like, oh, this is it.
Nice.
We found it.
You know what I'm excited about for your move, Katrina? That you are like 1,500 miles closer to the birthplace of Mothman and me, but mostly Mothman.
I'm so much closer to Mothman than I used to be. So it makes
it all the more plausible that we could go and visit the Mothman's absolutely caked up statue together for the first time for either one of us.
That is my absolute dream. I want that to happen for us. So thank you to everybody for both letting us know what was going on with our sound and for actually listening to the podcast when we like disappear. So I hope all of you are excited for this episode that's coming out, this anniversary episode, because it has been 5 years. 5 years since we started the podcast. Back when we were babies in 2019. It was a different time.
Much different time.
The world was different. We were different.
5 years that we've been podcasting, which seems insane.
Yeah. And we are back to podcasting in time to celebrate our podcast anniversary.
Whoop, whoop.
With a Cinderella episode.
That's how we do.
And also to maybe reflect back on the things that we have learned and forgotten. Geoff, what is the phenomenon called when after you learn so much about a certain topic, you start to realize how much you do not know at all about a topic?
Well, there's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is like people who don't know a lot, who know like just enough, think they know way more than they do. And it's kind of like part of that same sort of thing. They talk about it in the same frame of things where it's like the curve is like, you know nothing, and then you feel like you know a lot, and then you start feeling like you like know nothing again, and then you start like going back up to be like, oh, now I do know a lot. But like you always, I think once you've gone back down to realize all the stuff that you don't know, you always keep in your mind like, oh, there's so much that I don't know, which is why you keep learning and keep knowing more and being more confident in the amount that you do know, because you never again go to like, I know everything.
No, because it's funny because like after 5 years of podcasting and talking about folklore and fairy tale, I feel less qualified now to talk about it than like when we first started.
Yeah.
And you know, some of that is because like I have met and talked with and idolized other people who I feel like, oh, well, like they know so much more because they've been, you know, professors of folklore for years. And then at the same time, they're recommending our podcast to people.
Yeah.
And so that at least makes me feel like, okay, maybe we know enough about what we're talking about that at least we're not like embarrassing ourselves in front of other people.
Yeah. And I think we're pretty upfront about the stuff that we like don't know, you know, like when we're like, I'm just, especially me, which I mean, just blanket qualification on this is like anytime I'm speaking, I'm just spitballing and saying like whatever random thing I think. It is not, more often than not, it's not qualified in anything but my own thoughts and brain or the things that I have just heard that Katrina has told, which are, you know, from actual research.
Yeah, it's like hopefully slightly more informed. But no, it has been humbling, but it's also been super encouraging to have folklorist friends, donor characters, if you will, who've told us that they love the podcast, that they use our episodes in either high school classrooms, college classrooms. We've been mentioned in books and journal articles as resources for information. So it's wild.
That's crazy.
It is. When people are like, oh, let's talk about like people who are doing good work in folklore, in like public folklore and like interfacing with the public about folklore. And I'm like, is that me?
I'm the face?
I'm doing it. I guess I am doing it. I'm doing it right now. But no, I remember when I was like younger hearing people say stuff like, oh, this person, he's forgotten more about like cars, fossils, plant medicine, like whatever, than most people ever even know. And I was always like, what? What are you talking about? Like, if you're an expert on something, how can you forget so much about like the topic? But now I honestly think that if I were to listen back to some of our episodes, I would be shocked how much I learn
from yourself
about folklore and fairy tales. And in fact, to prepare for this episode, I did go back and listen to some of our previous like Cinderella episodes.
That's great.
Mostly I was going back to listen to them because I was like, all right, so like what are things that we've already talked about and discussed? How can I make a 5-year anniversary podcast about Cinderella fresh and interesting? Especially when you consider it's not our 5th episode with a Cinderella story. No. Not even close. Because
not even close.
This story, it pops up in pieces and parts all over the place. In fact, in our first year podcasting, it was like we did the Cinderella episode, and then we talked about Suni Maya before we then did the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of our podcast, which was another Cinderella story, one of the earliest versions that is found in China.
Yeah.
This year, this is not my first time talking about Cinderella. It's the first time that I'm talking about Cinderella on our podcast. But back in March, I was on an episode of Not My Fantasy Podcast with Hannah and Cullen, and we were talking about the live action Disney Cinderella movie and how the new movie intermixed a lot of the elements of the French Cinderella and the German Grimm's Brothers Cinderella together. And, you know, I was just listening back to some of the Cinderella episodes trying to think like, okay, what haven't we talked about yet? Like, what haven't we covered? Like, how can I make this an interesting, good 5th anniversary episode on Cinderella? And I think I have hit upon something.
Cinderella in space.
Ooh. Now you've really hit on something.
I'm going to eat my microphone cover if that is...
Into the Cinderverse. That's kind of what all the variants like are basically. Is.
Yeah.
It's like all these like different like universes.
But I'm on the edge of my seat. What are we going to be talking about? Because I legitimately don't know.
I will leave you a little bit on the edge of your seat for a second while we go back to talking about some of the fundamentals of the Cinderella tale type, which the ATU type is ATU 510A.
And the only thing I remember about the Cinderella tale type is that it's not the elements that I think it would be.
Yes.
Without previous knowledge, like the slipper, and that's the only thing I can think of. But there's more. But it's like, the first 3 that you would think of is like, okay, yes, those are part of the ones that we know the most, but that's not what makes it, you know, this tale type according to the ATU. That's what I remember. I remember what it's not. So please remind me what it is.
The very main thing is that it's like the shoe is a MacGuffin. We've joked about in like previous podcasts, like that the key ingredient of a Cinderella story is not the shoe like at all. And that's probably one of the most surprising things for people to hear, because that is like the image mentally that they see first. Or it's like they like close their eyes and they're like, shoe, fairy godmother, pumpkin, carriage, something.
Yeah.
And the only thing in that list that is like important is that helper character. And that's because that section of the ATU index is stories that involve like a magical helper. And so it's like, oh, that fairy godmother, important, but not always a fairy godmother. Sometimes it's a dead fish.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like what? Like a cow that has been like reanimated with the spirit of your mother? Or it's like a crab? There's something that's like someone's mom's spirit went into an animal.
Both of those. Because I think the crab one is from like Southeast Asia. Like maybe the Philippines. And the cow one is in like India or Pakistan, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's like it's always something. And that's what, like, in the German version, not the German. Yes, the German version. No, I lied. In the Italian version with Giambattista Basile, it's a tree. That's the mother, or like where the mother is buried, something like that, where like oh, it's a fairy gave her a tree because the fairy liked the cut of her jib.
A sailing idiom.
Even after she like murdered her father, the fairy she murdered her stepmother. The fairy was like, I like this girl. We should give her a magic tree.
Yeah.
Anyway,
wild.
So the elements to the Cinderella story are, number one, a persecuted heroine.
Yes.
Usually by a family member, mostly female family members. The second thing is that, like, helper, usually magical, but it does not have to be a magical helper. Number three is meeting a prince or like somebody of higher status. And they usually meet that person of higher status while they're hiding their true identity. And number four, the discovery of the identity of the person. Sometimes it's by like an object, such as a shoe, but it does not have to be. The shoe is not important. It could be like a bracelet. It could even be like a forbidden piece of knowledge, or like not a forbidden piece of knowledge, but like a secret piece of knowledge that like clues them in that, like, oh, if you know this thing, then you must be the person that I saw.
Yeah. I can't remember. I can't remember it being anything but a shoe, though. But that doesn't mean anything, except that I don't have a good memory.
Because it's like sometimes it's like a bracelet that like will magically like change its size. Or I can't remember if we've talked about ones where there's like an object that like sings when it's like being held by the right person. So like things like that.
Right.
So, and then number 5 is marriage to the person of higher status, because at baseline level, like, these stories are rags to riches. Sometimes they're riches to rags to riches. Like at the beginning of some of the Cinderella tales, like she's usually what is upper middle class to rags. And that's one percenters.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's like they're doing pretty well, but then they're not. But then it's like a comeback story.
Yeah.
Really. Which is interesting, because I was thinking, like, colloquially, when you say like it's a Cinderella story, like they use it in sports all the time. It's like, oh, the Cinderella story of the little team that went on to win it big and got the championship or whatever. But really, it would be like a team that was like pretty good that had a shot at the championship, but then like they lost their star player and then they did terribly. But then they came back after that to win the championship because they got a magic shoe.
That's usually the sequel.
Yeah. That's true.
Because they'll be like, in the first movie, like, yay, we're like the champions. And then in the sequel, since we're not rooting for them anymore because now they're not the underdogs, they have to make them the underdog.
Yeah.
So then you're rooting for them again.
But that is a good point of like and I think it's a good thing that'll help people remember. It'll help me remember to think of like, the stereotypical Cinderella story metaphor in sports being like, that's a key element of Cinderella stories, is that it's a rags to riches story.
Yeah. So in that regard of like rags to riches stories by persecuted heroines, we have also talked about ATU Index 480, the kind and the unkind girls.
Yes, I love that one.
So there's usually a similar dynamic of having persecuted heroine, and she's usually receiving like the worst treatment from like the stepmother type person and like step or half sisters. And a helper, like a fairy or a frost god or a monk, that curses the unkind and blesses the kind. And then they usually meet a prince or wealthy man that then wants to marry them. But they're usually missing the element of that identification through a disguise. Because it's kind of like, no, they have like flowers falling out of their mouth. It makes them pretty easy to like fine. That's the Thai version of the kind and unkind girls story.
I remember that.
Or in Charles Perrault, there's, I believe it's called Toads and Diamonds. And so, when you have diamonds falling out of your mouth, like it's really easy to identify you. You don't have to like go around being like, I will marry the girl whose diamond this mouth fit. No, wrong. I will go around and find the girl whose mouth fits this diamond in it. I could get that diamond in my mouth.
That story would be such a nightmare to like adapt to like a film version nowadays, because like how could you like literally show like someone like diamonds fall out of their mouths whenever they speak? Like how could you show that without the person being like like have talking through marbles?
Yeah, without it just like grossing people out.
Yeah, anyway.
I'm imagining now like possibly like a Marvel superhero or something that like has that like ability, except they're like, this sucks. Because that would suck. Anyway, but with all of these tales of ATU 510A stories, we haven't even touched on ATU 510B. Dun, dun, dun.
In 5 years of podcasting.
In 5 years, these stories are so close to being like the Cinderella tale type that they share the same number on the index, but they differ in a couple of important ways. So one of them is the disguise of animal skins that they use to escape from the persecution of their family.
Ooh. I like this already.
And then normally, unfortunately, there's also an incestuous father.
Oh gosh, why did you have to ruin it? No wonder these are the B tier stories.
I love that you were like, ooh, I'm excited already. And then I was like, incest. You're like, I hate it immediately. Which, good. Geoff, good. This is one of the things I think that our audience likes about you. You don't like cannibalism. You don't like it when people kill animals for no good reason. And you don't like incest.
Yeah. I've been told that those are some of my green flags.
And another interesting thing about these stories is that some scholars believe that this tale type is can be considered like the mother tale to the Cinderella story. So instead of them being sister tales to each other, where like they just seem related, but they're like different.
Yeah.
Some believe that these stories are actually like the predecessor because they include more of the arc of them being born rich and then falling to the lowest depths, and then them using all of the gifts that they have or whatever to achieve that riches at the end.
Okay.
And more information about that kind of line of thinking can be found in the book Seeing Through the Mother Goose Tales, Visual Turns in the Writings of Charles Perrault by Philip Lewis. And I will tell you though, if anybody does try to go out and buy this book, it is really dense academic writing. So Stanford University Press from 1996, if anyone's interested.
I mean, you just gave it such a ringing endorsement.
I know, I feel bad. Because I do know that there have been people that are like, oh, you're really good about like boosting like books on this subject. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, but unfortunately also like I realize that like when the book is like it's too geared towards like academia.
Yeah.
The majority of my audience aren't interested in like that level of like, oh, I can't wait to read the world's driest book. That's not what I'm saying about this book, but
no, yeah, but it's like listen. Yeah. If we didn't have a clue by the title, that's the thing I've discovered. Like when you'd say what the titles of the book are, like I can kind of tell it's like, oh, this is like an academic book that's like used as just like coursework in like graduate level classes. And this is like stuff that is meant to be like interesting to normal people as well, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. This podcast is meant to be able to be listened to and digested by people who are like casually interested in loving fairy tales.
And if you want to go hard, you can go hard. But if you don't, like me, just wait until Katrina reads these books and then tells you all the interesting stuff from them. And then you don't have to read it.
I feel like this story of the like ATU 510B, it got a lot of attention. It got looked at a lot in the time when a lot of things were, especially in like the literary world, were being examined through psychoanalytic lenses. And it's because of the incestuous father. People are like, oh, see, Oedipus. And I'm like, no.
That's opposite.
Yes, correct.
It's exactly opposite of Oedipus.
It's exactly wrong. But anyway, so today I've decided that the story that I'm going to be retelling is from Charles Perrault because it gives me the opportunity to throw him under the bus for being sexist. And that's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
That's like what this podcast is for. No, it's because I both love his writing and then it also, because he wrote it down in his own like literary style, we get to critique him as a person as well. We can critique like his literary choices as well as like, you know, comments on the culture at the time, the types of stories that people were like writing down and really enjoying telling each other in court, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's going to be a great time, guys.
I'm in.
Obviously, I am going to be reading a translation of it into English because my 17th century French is not great.
Yeah.
I guess we could have used your 17th century French skills.
Yeah, we could have, but you know, we'll let you do it your way.
So I will also say that this story is called Donkeyskin, and had I not said it
Never mind. I'm not in anymore. I'm out.
So this story is called Donkeyskin. And it's funny because the ATU 510B, like it used to be called The Dress of Gold, of Silver, and of Stars.
but why use that when you could call it Donkeyskin instead? Trust me, it sounds much better in 17th century French, okay? Just trust us on that.
What's funny is it's like the like direct translation like of what it is in French is ass's skin. Which is funny because people point out that like both of the titles for the stories that like in Charles Perrault's like book, he has got the Cinderella story and then he has like Donkeyskin, and both of these heroines are, and their stories are named after the cruel nickname that they were given. And when I read that, I was like, there exists an alternate universe where Disney decided to make ass's skin. And they were like, oh, I just feel like this won't like fly off of the shelves or whatever as quickly as like Cinderella. So anyway, good times, friend. But they changed the ATU name that was like the dress of gold, of silver, and of stars. They changed it to Donkeyskin because they like to name that the type, the tale that's kind of like the quintessential example of that type.
Which I see the logic behind that, but I would also like to lodge a formal complaint and request to change it back.
That makes sense.
But anyway, now that formal complaint and request has been made publicly, you may continue.
You feel a little better about it. So, once upon a time, because these stories actually do get to start that way.
Nice.
Love it when it happens. So, once upon a time, there was a king who was the most powerful ruler on earth.
What?
The story says that he was gentle in peace and terrifying in war, and he had no rivals. And all of the people who were under his protection loved him, and they had a very like rich and prosperous kingdom because he had in his possession a donkey. And this donkey was very special because this donkey crapped gold. And so instead of always, like living out in a stable, no. This donkey got to live inside of the palace in the lap of luxury, getting to eat whatever it wanted.
Yeah. And lots of it.
So that it would keep pooping gold. And people would be seen following this donkey around with like cupped hands behind it so that they could gather. I might have added that part, Geoff. I might have. I might have made the retelling my own.
That would be a challenging image to translate into a film as well. Actually, it wouldn't. It would be amazing, but you'd have to play it for laughs.
Yeah. And this man also had a beautiful, faithful companion in his wife, who was the picture of kindness, the picture of gentleness. She was beautiful and everything that you would want from a queen, especially married to such like a wonderful ruler. And the two of them were only able to have one child, as you can imagine, because these stories never have like, just like, oh, and not only were they extremely rich and wonderful and kind, and they also could have as many babies as they wanted. No, they have to have some trial. They have to have some tribulation, to make them interesting. And so they were only able to have the one child, who was their daughter. And does she receive a name?
No, of course not. Does the king? No one has a name so far, though.
Yeah, that's true.
But still.
And who would waste a name on a woman?
Or if she does, we're going to hear about it in like 37 minutes. Like when we're at like 3/4 of the way through the story, they'll find like, oh yeah, by the way, her name was Maria.
Yeah, when like somebody's suddenly like shouting out her name, and then it's like, oh, I guess she does have a name. So anyway, their daughter, even though she was their only child, she was so wonderful that they couldn't imagine having another child, because this child contained all of the perfect attributes that any parent would want for a child. Like, wow.
Who wrote this story? Her mom?
No, because her mom died.
Oh, yeah.
No,
I should have thought of that. I should have realized that.
Yeah. I did jump the gun a little bit. But anyway, this line I absolutely loved. I think I'm like, oh, gorgeous. It said, "Heaven sometimes tires of letting people enjoy happiness and always mingles the good with the bad, just as it alternates nice weather with rain." That seems like something that the French would say.
Yeah, it does. Beautifully depressing.
Yeah.
But kind of like finding beauty in the depressing.
Yes.
Not being a downer. They're finding a silver lining.
Yeah. They're saying that, like, you know what? This is life. Sometimes after too much happiness, there has to come the heartbreak. And the heartbreak was the sudden and fatal illness of the queen. So the queen became really, really sick, and she started to die. And right before she died, she said, "I want to make one last request of you, my husband." And of course, he was like, "Yes, darling, anything. What is it?" And she said, "If you decide to remarry when I am no longer," and he was like, No, don't say that. Don't talk about that. How could I ever remarry? You're so wonderful. You're so beautiful. Like, I can't live without you. And the queen was like, "I believe you. I understand. But just to be absolutely certain, I want you to swear that you will pledge your love and marry only if you find a woman more beautiful, more accomplished, and more wise than I am." And at this point, our dear friend Charles Perrault irritates the heck out of me. Because he says, like, confident in her own qualities, convinced the queen that the promise cunningly extracted was as good as an oath never to marry. Which, like, okay. In other versions of this tale, there's like a magic spell that goes like along with it, where it's like, oh, the king like then is like trapped because of this like magic spell that's connected with like the promise or like whatever. And basically it just serves as a way to excuse the king for what he's about to do next.
Oh,
because heaven forbid we hold a man accountable for his like crappy, disgusting actions.
Yeah. I'm going to do a mid-story fairy tale fix moment and say, like, I like the idea of, instead of it being like a curse, like have this be, it could be sort of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a kind thing for her to say, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I hope that because like I'm dying and I know I'm going to die, like I hope that you're going to be able to marry someone that's like, you know, like even better than me, or like just as good, you know, is like going to bring you as much happiness and that's going to be great for you. You know, it's like she's not being like, I hope you never marry anyone again because don't want to be like, you know, outshone or whatever. Because like, I hope you have a really good and happy life in another marriage and you're able to like move on because I love you and I want what's best for you, even if, you know, like it's not me because I'm not going to be here because I'm going to be dead, you know? That's my fix.
I'm like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but I feel like us being able to read that very like...
Yeah, like charitably. Like a charitable interpretation of her words.
Yeah, the reason why we're able to read so charitably into like what she's saying is because we, as spouses, would also think that for like for the people that we're married to, if like we died, that if they remarried, it's to somebody who treats them well, that they don't settle for anything less than they deserve, which is me. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, at least if I die and you, like, remarry, please, like, you know, improve upon the first marriage, you know?
Yeah.
That's the way that you and I think, that we're like, I hope, because that's how I read it, too, when I, like, read
right.
it.
About our respective spouses. It kind of sounded like you're saying that to me, like if you died and I remarried, but it's like, but that would not be the case, in which, like, you can die and I'll just still be married to my wife, you know? Like, I don't have to get remarried at that point.
I love it. Yeah. I was just gonna say, I love anytime when we like mentioned like marriage or something. Cause at one point I said in a different like podcast episode not too long ago, like, oh, like when we got married, they hadn't invented like they hadn't invented like Tinder and stuff like that yet. Right. And you like paused to be like, two different people. We got married, two different people.
But in a similar time frame that was before the existence of Tinder and Bumble and Jube Splat and
Grindr.
You
and I are older than Grindr. Or our marriages are older than Grindr.
Yeah. And we are, but one of those things is more impressive than the other.
Yes. We've been married longer than Grindr has been around. Because let me tell you. If I hadn't been married then, I wouldn't be married now. No. What were we talking
about? What the wife said, and he was like roped in by a curse, a magical curse that he's going to have to subvert by being gross.
Yes.
And terrible.
And like, of course, you know, the author of this is always like never misses a line to like stick a subtle jab at like women. And if people don't know why I'm going so hard on this man about this topic, please go back and listen to our Bluebeard episode where he basically was like, women, the moral of this story is you shouldn't be so curious. Your husband wouldn't want to kill you so much if you just mind your business. It's like, Charles, I don't think that is the moral of the story. Anyway, and so like, yeah, I go pretty hard on him for like anytime he'll do kind of like, a literary aside where he's like, oh, and here we see that women are terrible. I'm like, okay, well, that didn't seem necessary. But anyway, the king promised his wife that he wouldn't remarry until he found somebody who was more beautiful, more accomplished, and more wise than she was. How wise she was, I don't know. If she's that, if she did this on purpose, which I don't buy into. I hate you, Charles. Anyway, so the queen died in the king's arms. And it said, never did a king make such a grand display of his emotions. He was crying day and night. It seemed just a never-ending sadness for him, which I'm like, okay, that's beautiful. I don't want my spouse to have never-ending sadness like when I die, but like a proper amount and time frame for mourning is appreciated.
I don't want them doing like a little jig on my grave either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, let's find a happy medium between the two.
But then here, Charles takes the time to say something like not quite so nice about the king, which, listen, I appreciate. Turnabout is fair play. Like, I don't know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Whichever idiom fits in here, that's how I feel. But it says that he was mourning his deceased wife like a man eager to put the business behind him as quickly as possible.
Oh, geez.
Which I'm like, that's an interesting take on like somebody being deeply, deeply sad. And it's like, oh, they're just trying to get it out of their system really fast. I'm like, I don't think that's how that works, but okay.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But it says, and indeed, this proved to be the case because after like a couple of months, the king was like, all right, it's time for me to start looking around to see who I'm going to marry next.
Too bad Tinder hasn't been invented.
So he wanted to start looking for a new wife, but it wasn't that simple because he had made this stupid, dumb promise to his wife, which it doesn't go so much as saying that it was like a spell or a curse that was like placed on him. Cause I'm like, listen, when your wife dies, you can kind of do whatever you want, like about the promises that you made to them. I'm not saying it's morally right one way or another, but it is like, whatever. They're dead. What can they do? I guess in fairy tales, they can come back and haunt you or something, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he had to keep his promise that he had made to his wife. So he was like, okay, how can I find a more charming and attractive person than her? Because like she kind of was it in the kingdom. And so he was looking like all throughout his court for like anybody that matched her in beauty. He was looking around the country for anybody who matched her in wit. And, he was, starting to leave the city limits, going into other kingdoms looking for ladies, but like no one was fitting the bill. And so he was getting really, really irritated. So the king noticed with a burning desire that was driving him mad that his own daughter was the only person who was more beautiful and more accomplished and more wise than his wife was. So he decided that he was going to talk to, it says a philosopher, to see if he would like agree that he could marry his daughter. And so I don't know if it means like philosopher or like somebody to basically be like, yeah, I'd okay this marriage certificate. Because probably the majority of people that he would ask were grodied out by it. They're like, that's disgusting. That's nasty. And I'm not going to sign a marriage certificate. And they were right for that. But he found somebody who was wrong for that and had agreed that they would sign the marriage certificate. And so, let his daughter know what was going on, what was happening. And the princess obviously was super upset about this. It said, saddened by this kind of love, grieved and wept day and night. I'm like, yeah. That's the right response. So her heart was aching and she really didn't know what to do. So she went to go find her godmother. And of course, godmothers is a term that has like religious significance. It is like a person that is chosen when like a child is christened that's basically going to step in and take the place of a parent. If the parent were to die or something would happen like to the parent, that person is promising that they will step in to that position and fulfill that role, usually in like a religious sense, like making sure that like religiously they're brought up right. Which I think still counts here in this story, because it's probably against their religion if they think about it to incest.
Which is so interesting that you say that whole thing about like godparents. Because maybe you've said it before, but I feel like literally this past week, I feel like I learned for the first time that like, a godfather, godmother was, more than most things supposed to be like in charge of like the religious like upbringing of this person, like the religious like education and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just would have taught me it again within a week of the first time I thought I learned it. So.
Oh, nice. Because I'm sure that like we've mentioned it in the past before, but who knows? Maybe we haven't. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought of it more as like, like, oh, if something happens to you, they're like your like sort of adoptive parents in a way, like they're the secondary parents that are supposed, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
while your parents are still alive, they're like involved in whatever. But I don't know. I never really. It makes sense with it being a religious thing, like that it is like, oh yeah, like, and the name God being in it being like very tied to
religious
fathering or mothering of an individual.
And I think there was like a period of time where like it was getting like really out of hand, because there's also like a little bit of like not totally like a financial like benefit to it, but like in that way of like if the person went and they were like, "Oh, but this is your godchild, so can you help them? You're not going to let this kid suffer. You're not going to let us like fall on hard times, or like you're going to like help." And so because of that kind of like social ties, but a little bit financial ties that would be created by that, sometimes people were choosing like a lot of people to do it, where they're like, "Oh, I want this person, this person, this person to be like a godmother, and then this person to be godfathers, and this kid really needs like all of these people to be like tied to them." And it was getting like out of hand, and so there had to be like rules made about like how many godparents you could have and how that was structured and like could work.
Right.
So anyway, the princess went to find her godmother, who lived a distance away. It said out in a remote grotto. And of course, like whenever anybody in a story is removed from society, like out on the edge of society, that's like a clue that this person is somewhat magical, that because of their like magical abilities, they are kind of otherized and pushed on the fringes of like society.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time. Those hags and crags. But what's crazy is it's like this remote grotto that's like made out of like pearls and coral. So I'm like, is this woman of the sea?
Yeah, she's a sea hag.
Yes. Anyway, so then the story says, she was an extraordinary fairy, unrivaled in her art. So like there we have it. A fairy godmother. I think in a way that we have not seen in like any of like the Cinderella stories that we've covered. Like somebody who's like explained for like, she is a godmother in that she's this child's like religious godmother, but also she was a fairy. Have you heard that TikTok sound?
Yeah.
So I love this. I do love this line from Charles. He and I are on first name basis. Charles says, "There's no need to tell you what a fairy was in those radiant days, for I am sure that those who love you told you all about them when you were very young." I'm like, oh, sweet. But yes, also relevant. I know what a fairy godmother is. You don't have to explain it to me. So immediately the fairy godmother was like, "I know what's brought you here. I know why you're upset, why you're sad. Your father is being disgusting. But I can promise you that nothing is going to harm you as long as you follow my advice. So we have to figure out a way for you to refuse to marry him, because like absolutely under no circumstance should you do that. So, but we have to find a way for you to refuse him that's not going to get you like killed for being disobedient and obstinate. So we have to find a way for him to like basically not be able to accomplish like part of his deal. So what I want you to do is go and tell him that you will marry him if he gives you what you desire, and say that you want him to give you a dress the color of the seasons. There are other translations that say like a dress the color of time, or a dress the color of the sky's many seasons. So the many hues of like the changing sky.
Right.
Which is like all colors.
Yeah. Joseph's Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat kind of a deal.
Yeah. Because it's like the sky doesn't have one color. It has thousands of colors.
All of them.
It has all of the colors and that change like throughout time. So go and tell your father that you would like a dress like that. And the fairy godmother says, no matter how rich and powerful he is, and no matter how much he is favored by the heavens, he will never be able to fulfill that request. But spoiler alert. Oh, anyway. So in fear and sadness, the princess like goes back to the castle, and she tells her father what the fairy godmother had told her, that, you know, she would fulfill his desires if he fulfilled hers, by giving her this dress of like these colors. And so he goes to, you know, the tailors, the seamstresses and stuff. And he basically is like, I want you to make my daughter this dress that is like, you know, the changing like times and seasons, the many hues of the sky. And you have until tomorrow. And if you don't, I'm going to kill you, which that's not great. Doesn't say a whole lot about like his character as a person. I've just got to say. But anyway, so under that terror, all the tailors and seamstresses like got to work designing and creating and manufacturing this dress until the next day. The king was able to present to his daughter this dress that, like, as she moved and swayed, it changed to the many hues of the changing sky, which I'm like, dude, that sounds gorgeous. I want that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's magical and it doesn't exist.
No.
Anyway, but I was like, oh, I love that. There's stuff like that in like fairy tales where I am just like, oh man, that's like so beautiful to imagine. And, you know, like somebody even like, you know, saying something like that or like coming up with like that. And so anyway, so I just love reading fairy tales because sometimes you get just like some rich imagery like that just takes you outside of like what is like real and normal. And it like, I don't know, it connects you with what is real, which is like the changing sky and how beautiful that is. And just like imagining it onto something that like, you know, it couldn't possibly ever be on in real life. So anyway, that was just a brief aside about how much I love language and storytelling and imagination. So anyway, when the princess received this dress, she at first was looking at the dress and was like, oh my gosh, this is like the most beautiful, gorgeous, like insane, like magical thing like I've ever seen in my life. This is like so unreally like beautiful. I'm overjoyed to see this dress, but then equal measures, absolutely horrified that her father was able to do this, like was able to like make the dress. And her fairy godmother, who was like there with her, like when this happened, she like leaned over to her and was like, you need to ask for a dress more brilliant than this one. Ask for a dress that is the color of the moon in all of its silvery glory. So, you know, the daughter is like, of course, yeah, if I ask for a dress that's even better than this one, like there's no possible way that he'll be able to do that. And so she, you know, thanks her father for the dress and says, I want a dress more splendid than the star of the night, which she means like the moon. I think they like describe it as like the star that is so big and so bright that it dims all the other stars around it. That's what I want this dress to do when I wear it. I want it to like dim the stars like in the sky because I will look so brilliant in it. And I need it to be ready in 4 days, which I'm like, why'd you give him more time?
Yeah. Be like 20 minutes.
Yeah. Those poor tailors and seamstresses, though, they don't deserve that. They're like, oh, so I'm going to die in 20 minutes. Thank you. Sweet.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, they get to work, you know, like making this like dress. And then within 4 days, they, of course, you know, present it to the princess from the father. And he was like, what do you think? And she's like, oh my gosh, like this is the most gorgeous, beautiful dress ever in the world. The very stars in the sky like dim when like I walk in wearing like this beautiful dress. The party don't start till I walk in. Thank you for laughing. It makes me feel better. So the king presents his daughter with this like absolutely gorgeous dress, and she is again equal parts like delighted and amazed to have such like a beautiful dress and be able to put something on that's like so unearthly gorgeous, and at the same time disgusted and horrified because like her father was able to do this thing that was supposed to be impossible, and then now what if she has to like marry this guy who is her father? And so she's just yeah, correct. So her godmother like turns to her and she's like, you need to say to him that I can't be satisfied until I have a dress the color of the sun, but one that is even more radiant than the sun. That even, what was it? I think like in some versions it was like that it was so beautiful that even the lover of Apollo would envy the dress. And I'm like, dang. wedding because, of course, like
Nice.
Apollo is like the god of like the sun.
Yeah. This dress better be so bright that someone has to wear special sunglasses, even if someone is walking between me and them and they want to look in my direction.
Yeah. I just thought of like a horrible joke that I was like, this is the worst. This is the worst episode of Say Yes to the Dress.
That's a great joke.
Oh, yay. I just delivered
That's
it.
better than my stupid eclipse joke.
But I don't think I would have thought of that joke if you hadn't, like, I don't know. Whatever you said,
You're like,
it wiggled loose something in my brain that was like, say yes to the dress.
You're like, oh wow, he's willing to go out on a limb for that crappy joke. I could tell my joke that I thought was bad because it's way better than that.
No. Anyway, so the royal seamstresses and tailors like went to work trying to make this dress for the king because of course he was like threatening to kill them if they didn't get it done like in a timely manner. And so they were working as hard and fast as they could to like get this dress done. And so they did. They were able to finish this dress and get it in time to present to the king and so that he could give it to his daughter. And when he gave it to his daughter, she was, again, equal parts, delighted by the bright radiance of it. There were diamonds that were multiplying the light that was radiating from the dress so that light seemed to just like stream off of this dress. And she just couldn't believe like how gorgeous, how beautiful this dress was that her father was able to make for her. But again, horrified because what is she going to do now? Because now she's going to have to marry him because he was able to make like all three of these dresses. And she was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so her godmother said to her, are these gifts that you have received really so marvelous when he has a donkey, as you know, continually filling his coffers with gold coins? Ask him for the hide of that wondrous animal. Unless I'm badly mistaken, you won't get it from him since it is the sole source of his wealth. So it's like all of the wealth of like the kingdom is coming from this donkey, the prized possession that lives in the palace. The godmother is banking on the fact that, okay, the king isn't going to give you the skin of this animal because the skin of the animal is basically useless.
Yeah.
It's just a disgusting hide because what's worthwhile in the animal is what comes out of its rear. I do like the choice I made with the voice just then. And the story says the fairy was very learned, and yet she was unaware that passionate love, provided that it has some hope, takes not the least notice of money or gold. Which I feel like that's a beautiful sentiment, but not in this context.
Not in this context. Yeah, exactly. That was like almost word for word the thought that was in my brain.
It's like, not right now. It's not a beautiful sentiment. So imagine the princess's horror and disgust when brought to her bedroom is the hide of this donkey. Because immediately she's realized he's done it. The absolute, like, impossible. He has killed that donkey and now she like has to marry him.
I feel like physically ill to think of the fact that he was like so hot for his own daughter that's like the extent that he would go to.
Yeah.
Like that really is just like, I don't know. It makes this, I was just saying like it makes the story, I don't know, like it makes the story like really compelling as like a horror story, almost like kind of a level, you know what I mean? Which I think is part of the point. I don't think Charles Perrault's, he may have been a jerk about like his wife was like about being super judgmental about the wife in the story, but I don't think he's gonna be like, and this was totally cool, totally great, like it's so laudable what this man was doing to try to marry his own daughter. I don't think he's supporting incest. So it's like,
because it's like the horror of this story is the fact that like the person telling it and the audience knows that this is disgusting, like that this would be a horrible thing to like have happen. And because there is that like that social agreement there, the story doesn't reach that like absolute disgusting like finale with people being like and everyone loved it.
Right. And that's part of the thing too, where it's like I'm disgusted, but in a way that's like contextually appropriate to the story. Like, I'm not disgusted by the story. It's like, oh my gosh, this story is disgusting. I can't believe it exists. It's the point. I'm supposed to be disgusted at this moment.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
Working.
So the princess is just like, oh my gosh, like I've done everything that my godmother told me to do. I thought I was like doing like everything right. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think the only way that I can like escape from this eventuality is like to kill myself. And the godmother was like, no, don't do that. Here's what we're going to do to help you escape. Because now you have like the perfect disguise. I'm going to put all of the dresses that your father has given you into this magical chest. And I'm going to hand you this wand that just looks like a stick. And the chest full of all the dresses will follow wherever that like wand goes. And when you want something out of your chest, you just ding, touch the ground, and this chest will pop out of the earth. And when you want to put it back away, just, put the wand back to the earth and the trunk will sink back down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover you in this donkey skin. So she wraps this skin around this girl, which basically, I'm like, it doesn't like, it almost seems like it magically like adheres to her to make her physically grotesque. Not like, oh, you're wearing something grotesque, but like, oh, it's like a part of you now.
Mm-hmm.
And so she puts on the donkey skin and is perfectly concealed within it. It says, it is so hideous that no one will ever believe that it is covering anything beautiful. So after she's put on that disguise, she leaves the palace in the darkness of night and like disappears. So obviously everybody is like beside themselves, like hunting for her, looking for her. And so she knows that she has to get like completely out of the kingdom. And so she travels day and night, getting like basically like dirtier and nastier the like longer that she is like wandering in like the wilderness to a new kingdom. So when she arrives at this new kingdom, she is in tatters. She's disgusting, disheveled, and she's just looking around everywhere to get a job. And finally, she was able to find a peasant's wife that needed a scullery made. Which, again, a peasant's wife that needed a scullery maid. So it's like, it's not like, oh, and then she became a maid in a fine household. Like, no. She basically was just like in a peasant's house, living on scraps, and they had a space in a falling down shack in like the back of their property that she could sleep at night. Like an animal. It was basically like a barn. Which the story points out, like, how interesting it is that the donkey was living in the palace, and then when she puts on its skin, she's living, like, in a barn. Like,
right.
Now she's being treated like the animal that animal never was treated like.
Yeah.
So, she's working as a scullery maid in the back. Like, it says, she was put into a back corner of the kitchen where the valets, whose insolent scoundrels ridiculed, attacked, and mocked her all the times. And so, she was just treated horribly, like day in and day out. And they gave her a name, and it was Donkeyskin.
Ugh.
So everyone's like, oh, old Donkeyskin over there. Like, oh, look at little Donkeyskin. And yeah, treated her horribly.
Like she was a worker at the Waffle House.
Like a worker at Waffle House. So on Sundays, when everybody like went off to church and left her alone, she would be back in her like little room in her shed, and she would magic up her trunk out of the ground and pull out one of her like beautiful radiant dresses and put them on just to remind herself that like she is a human being and not some disgusting animal like of a woman. Which, listen, as a person who has like given birth to children and then for a while faded away from myself, it felt like, yes, anytime I could take a shower and then just like put on a dress and some makeup and be like, oh, hello, Aren't you a lovely lady? In the mirror, like a crazy person. So she's real for that. So anyway, yes. So she would kind of like cheer herself up by looking at like all these beautiful dresses, the one of the sky, the one of the moon, and the one of the sun. So this became her life, day in, day out, week in, week out, where she would spend the majority of the week being mocked, being treated like a beast of burden. And then on Sunday, when everyone was away, trying on her beautiful clothes. Meanwhile, at the edge of this large farm, there was a powerful and a regal king who had an aviary that was like connected, like shared like a border wall or something with this like farm. And, which I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So one of the king's sons loved to go out to the kingdoms and the king's aviary to look at all the birds and sometimes to go hunting while he was there. Doesn't seem very sporting, but all right. And so he would go out to the royal aviary, and he especially liked to go out on Sundays when he could have some time alone. So while he was out hunting and enjoying the aviary this one time, he happened to spy the shed on the edge of this property that he'd never seen before. He wandered over to the shed, and I love this line because it said, by chance, he put his eye to the keyhole. I'm like, by chance?
That doesn't happen by chance, man.
He tripped over a root in the ground, and he fell eyeball first straight into the keyhole. I'm like, what? And since this day, it says this day was a holiday, not a Sunday. I don't know. Listen. Was he where he was supposed to be? Was she where she was supposed to be? I don't know. Religiously, are they covered? I don't know. But anyway, Donkeyskin was using this holiday to stay back in the shed and try on her beautiful dresses. So when he looked through the keyhole, was able to see her wearing one of her many like gorgeous bedazzled dresses. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is like the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life. This woman is more beautiful than anyone in the world, probably more clever, more witty than anybody. Like, I have to know like who this person is. And it says 3 times he was about to push the door open, but each time his arm was arrested by the admiration he felt for this seemingly divine creature. He's like, oh, I can't go in because of how much I admire her. Like, all right, you're just feeling a little shy. That's all right. Anyway, so instead of going into the room, he like quickly like retreated and went back to the palace. Day in and day out, all he could think about was the beautiful woman that he had seen in that shed. But he didn't want to tell anybody about it because obviously, because this woman was in a shed, maybe she wasn't like royalty, so he didn't know what to do. And so he fell into a fit of melancholy. And he was like refusing to eat and like getting thinner and thinner. And his parents were, of course, like worried because for all they knew, he like went out to go catch some birds and then came back and was like, oh, I can't eat. I can't anything. And they're like, I have no clue what is wrong with this boy.
Yeah. Maybe you had bird flu or something. I don't know.
The joke was right there. You're like, it's bird flu. So he started to inquire of like other people, like, oh, does anybody know anybody, like anything about the person that, you know, lives in this area and might live in a shed or whatever. And everyone was like, are you talking about Donkeyskin? Are you talking about that gross, disgusting, ugly Donkeyskin? Is that what you're talking about? And he felt so ashamed and ridiculed, which I'm like, dude, love who you love, even if it's Donkeyskin, okay? Be into it.
Unless it's your daughter. That's the moral of this story.
That's the moral of this story. Quick caveat. So anyway, he just like fell into like fits of melancholy, not knowing what to do because like not only had he fallen in love with somebody who was like a commoner, but he'd somehow fallen in love with like the most disgusting commoner of all, Donkeyskin. He didn't know what to do. So he like stopped eating and stopped drinking, and his parents were like, oh, we have to do something, like, what can we do? And so they kept going to him and asking him, like, what can be done to help you? What do you need? Like, what do you want? And he finally said, the only thing that would make me happy is eating a cake that was made by the hands of Donkeyskin. Which is like, wow, buddy, like, how dehydrated are you? You're hallucinating. But anyway, so the mother, wanting to do anything possible she could to like save her son, was like, oh, of course, we'll go and find like Donkeyskin. And so they, went to this like peasant's house and asked about their scullery maid. And she was like, oh, you're talking about Donkeyskin? And they're like, yeah. So she comes out and the queen is like, my son wishes for you to like make him a cake to help to like heal him. And Donkeyskin was like, I will do this thing, except that I have to do it completely alone. And they're like, okay, that sounds as normal as anything else that's happening right now. Which I was like, I'm imagining, listen, you know that song's like, you can't eat at everybody's house.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I was thinking like that everybody must have been thinking about that when like they watch like Donkeyskin, who's like wearing this like cloak, this like gross cloak, and then she's like all like dirty and gross, and then she's like, yeah, I'll bake you a cake, I just gotta be alone with it first. And it's like, like, no, how about like we watch you at every point to make sure that nothing gross falls into the cake. So anyway, she like goes off to like be alone, and she like washes her hands and her arms, which I do appreciate they mentioned that in the story so that I, didn't want to gag while listening to the story. So that she like washed her hands, washed like her arms, and then she started to, and then I think it was like she put on like one of her gowns, like she put on like some of her like old clothes and started making him this cake. And so as she, sorry, I forgot about this part where it's, good heavens, madam, Donkeyskin is nothing but a grubby little fright. Anyway, so she ground out the flour for the cake herself to make sure that it was like the finest ground flour. And she carefully mixed in the salt and the butter and the fresh eggs. And while she was working like on this cake, one of her gold and emerald rings fell off of her finger into the cake. And she finished baking the cake and put back on her like Donkeyskin and handed it to the queen. And the queen took the cake to her son, who quickly started to devour this cake. He hadn't eaten for like days. So when he got like the cake, he was just eating it so fast that he almost, it says, ate the ring that was concealed in his cake. But he found the ring, and he at first didn't know what to do with it. And so he took the ring and he put it underneath his pillow. But this caused him to fall even deeper into his love sickness. And I love that they like got a doctor to like come and see him. And the doctor like came out and was like, your son, he's ill with love sickness. It's like, wow, that's one of the most French things I've ever heard. So anyway, they, started to, the king and the queen were like really surprised because they were like, wait, lovesick with who? Like lovesick about what? And he was like, I'm lovesick with like whose ever gold and emerald ring this is. And he like, pulled it out. And they were like, we'll find who owns that ring. That's such a fine ring. It has to belong to somebody that's in the court. And so they call everybody in the court to try to fit the ring on their finger. And they're trying it on everyone's finger and everybody's finger. It did say everybody's finger was either too fat or too small, which I liked because it wasn't a like, oh, I'm looking for like the thinnest woman of them all.
The daintiest hands.
Yeah, the daintiest hands.
It needed to be just right.
Just right. That's how I like my porridge. Just right.
How the prince likes his women.
Just right.
Fingers. Just right size for the rig. Cut it.
So there is this like one element that's very reminiscent of some other Cinderella stories where there were women who heard that they were trying on this like ring, and so they tried to shave off parts of their finger. I know, Geoff, some of them is like, it's gross. Like they took like a grater and tried to like grate us.
Jeez.
I'm like, you didn't need to like go into like all this detail, but they did, because they were like scraped her finger as if it was a radish. I'm like, ew. They're like, a third woman tried to squeeze her finger so that it would become smaller, which I'm like, that's fine. I mean, I guess depending on like what she was doing, because like if she was putting it in like a vice or something, then like don't do that.
Yeah, that's gonna be counterproductive. Yeah, it's gonna be smaller while it's getting squoze, but as soon as you take it out of that thing, the damage that you've done to the tissues are gonna cause it to swell up even more than it was before.
Oh yeah, that is bad. And then a fourth woman used a certain kind of liquid to make the skin fall off so that her finger would be smaller.
Oh.
Which I'm like, do you think that the prince, when he sees your skinless fingers, is going to be like, yep, that's what I like.
That's the one.
That's the woman for me. So after he tried it on all of the women of the court, he was like, okay, now what do I do? Because all of the women who it could be in the court, it doesn't belong to her. And so then they were like, oh, well, maybe some of the merchant class, maybe some of the, until finally they were asking all of the peasants to come and try on the ring. But none was just right. They were either too big or too small. And finally, they thought they had looked at everybody's finger that they possibly could, until somebody said, well, we haven't tried it on Donkeyskin's finger, am I right?
Yeah, I was going to say, as a complete joke, they were saying that.
Like, oh, you forgot her, the absolute lowest of the low. So everybody told him, yeah, we've looked at everybody except like Donkeyskin, but I mean, gross. But the prince was like, well, why not? Let her come to the palace. And so, everybody was kind of like, you want a dirty little fright like that coming here? Which I'm like, wow, these are some harsh and creative things we're saying. Anyway, Donkeyskin came out and she drew out a little hand that was as white as ivory and colored by a touch of crimson from under the dark skin of the donkey. And when the destined ring fit her little finger with unmatched precision, the court was in a state of astonishment and shock. Obviously, I love it. And immediately everyone, when they saw that her finger went on the ring, when they saw that the ring went on her finger, they were like, oh, we need to get you to the king. We need to get you to the king right away. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. But she was like, no. I need to go wash off and get ready before I go, which, yeah. She's like, I'm not going to dress like this. Gross. And so she went and she got changed. And when she came out wearing, it seems from the description that it's kind of like a mixture of the different things that she had, because she has the diamonds and sun type things in her hair, because it's her hair was emitting light from the diamonds, and she's got these gorgeous royal cloaks and the silver cape on her, so she's wearing kind of a mix of all of the most beautiful, fantastic things that she had received from her father. And she walks into court and everybody is just so shocked to see her, not just because what, this was Donkeyskin, but also because the things she's wearing are gorgeous beyond the likes of which no one has ever seen before. And immediately the king and the queen fall in love with their daughter-in-law, and they're like, yes, truly a person worthy of our son. Which I'm like, wow, but is your son worthy of her?
That's a question.
This guy whose eye accidentally looks at keyholes. I don't know about this guy. Anyway, so immediately preparations were made for a big festive wedding, and invitations were sent out to all of the kingdoms. And who should arrive to her wedding but her father?
Uh-oh.
Luckily, he had purged himself of all lawless desires. All that was left in his heart of that wicked flame had been transformed into paternal devotion. And so thus, we absolve this man of all of the gross creepiness that was there. It's oh, well, never mind. He couldn't help himself. Oh, gross. Barf. Anyway, so he blesses his daughter, saying, "May the heavens be blessed for allowing me to see you again, my dearest child." And so they have a big, glorious wedding, and the godmother arrives and tells the tale of what has happened to like all of the people, and they rejoice and celebrate that they were able to have such a beautiful and accomplished woman to now be married to the prince. And of course, it wouldn't be our dear Charles if we didn't get a nice moral. He says, "It is not difficult to see that the moral to this story teaches children that it is better to expose yourself to harsh adversity than to neglect your duties." Does it, Charles? Does this story teach us that? I don't know, man. Anyway, but this princess, far away from her father, was able to live happily ever after.
Thank goodness.
The story of Donkeyskin may be hard to believe, but as long as there are children, mothers, and grandmothers in this world, it will be fondly remembered by all. And that's an important place to leave this story, because has this story been remembered by all?
No.
It's one of those stories that like was in Charles Perrault's collection of tales, that so he had picked specifically like 8 tales, I think it was, that he thought kind of were the best examples of like the genre that he felt like, you know, would stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And this tale, because it is so similar, you know, ATU 510A versus ATU 510B, because these two tales are so similar to each other, but one of them deals with a subject matter that is like a lot rougher to deal with. Like, no, this story really has not, you know, stood the test of time or like captured the mind and imagination of as many people as like Cinderella has today.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really fascinating to look at it that way, where you can like compare the two, like the two were put in like the same collection of tales and share like so many similarities, where it's like you have that persecuted heroine, but you also, in this tale, you have this interesting situation where it's like, you know, she was born royal, fell to the like absolute bottommost drudgery like level, and then was still able to marry somebody like of equal status in this like miraculous way. And so it's like in some ways this story is like richer in some of its detail, like richer in the story arc, and also in how the heroine does a lot more in her tale than like Cinderella's typically do.
Yeah.
And so it's like, even though it has like that kind of stuff, like where like that add to a Cinderella tale that make it like richer, because of the like incestuous portion of the story, it's really hard to tell as a bedtime story.
Yeah, it's like it's dark.
Yeah. In a way that like, it's one thing to tell kids like stories about like wolves prowling around at night, you know, that possible danger, threat of like injury or death. It's another thing to like insinuate like the violence of a like incestuous relationship to children.
Yeah.
And because of that, and because tales like this started to more and more be relegated to children, being given like to children, you know, the types of stories that were being pulled to give to children, you know, like they were getting cold for like the most disgusting stuff was getting like cut out. The things that would be like the most egregious to children was getting cut out, and those tales aren't being told anymore. And so it's interesting because it's like, yeah, that story really has not stood the test of time in the same way as Cinderella had, even though I think Charles Perrault, when he wrote it down, thought that it was a tale that was worth retelling and worth continuing to like pass on.
There's one thing I wonder about when you say that too, which is like from my perspective, I was very quick to say like, no, it's not the one that lived on. I'd never heard of it until we told it on the podcast today. And I do think that stands just as far as like other people as well. But part of me wonders like what I have learned from our podcast is that a lot of the fairy tales that I have been accustomed to, like in American culture in the United States of America, it seems like a majority of those really have come through like the Brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
More than Charles Perrault. Like Charles Perrault, I feel like we didn't, like even some of his more famous ones like Bluebeard or things like that, or like, I'd like heard of it, but I'm not as familiar with it. So I feel like even Cinderella before Disney, you know what I mean? Like it was like the Brothers Grimm one seemed to be the one that was like more caught hold more in the United States than like the French versions of the tales did or not. So I'm curious to see like, in France, is there any more awareness of it, you know what I mean, than there is here? Or I'm sure it's obviously like not as popular as Cinderella ended up becoming, even in France. But it's just like, like I would not be surprised if it's, like it stands for all the reasons that you just mentioned, but there's a part of me that's like, I just wonder, like, is there a place where there are people that know this better or not? Like where you could say like, oh, Donkeyskin, and would someone know what you're talking about? Like in France or whatever.
Like you're probably right. Cause it's like, they probably are also like more aware of like Ricky of the Tuft was like another one that we've covered like on the podcast before that was part of that same collection. Like Diamonds and Toads or Toads and Diamonds, like that. The one that's the Unkind Sisters tale. And I bet, that it's like in France where these stories were like better known and like passed around more. Probably. You're right.
So if you are a French listener of the podcast, let us know.
Yeah.
Although we've said some kind of like jokingly anti-French things throughout here, so they may have a lot of other things to say to us as well.
Je suis facile. That means I am
My
easy.
grandmother's French.
Oh.
If that helps insulate me from any of this hatred that might be coming our way. She's kind of French. It's a long story.
Je suis désolé, Monsieur Messi. Yeah, no, I'm like, you're probably right that it's like in certain areas, like it is better known. And yeah, I mean, as long as there are mothers and grandmothers, this story will live on. I think it's also interesting that he says it that way too, that it's like, as long as there are children, mothers, and grandmothers, like these stories will live on. Because I'm like, Charles, you are a man. And you wrote, you wrote these tales down, and yet you're saying that like, oh yeah, as long as women are telling stories, they'll tell this one. It's like, okay, but also Charles.
What you mean by that, man?
What do you mean by that? Tell me.
Yeah, we know from many of the things that you've written, you don't have the highest opinion of women. So it's hard to think that was supposed to be a compliment.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Even though it seems weird that you would be like, looking down your nose at like fairy tales while he's like writing a book of them. It's like, all right, buddy. All right. So to all of our listeners, we are excited about the coming years that we have doing this podcast. We're especially excited for the next year. I am going to be settling into my life in a new state. I'm excited to, do a bunch of like folklore related fun activities out here. There are so many like seasonal festivals and celebrations and just a lot of different cultural communities that I'm excited to see and learn more about. And I hope that it inspires some episodes of the podcast. We'll see. But yeah, I'm super thrilled to be back to making podcasts.
And so glad for all of you at home joining in with us.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories, an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin. There was a joke in there somewhere, but not an appropriate joke. We got to keep this podcast on the up and up. Only donkeys crapping gold into people's hands on this podcast.